Would you believe that a simple bark could be the difference between life and death? Imagine sleeping soundly in your home, believing you are protected by the walls of your home, when, without realizing it, danger quietly approaches. Flames begin to rise in a forgotten corner, pure air gives way to dense smoke, and every second that passes becomes more precious than the previous one. Now think, who would be able to notice this impending danger first? What would you do if you were in this scenario, completely oblivious to the risk that grows just a few meters away from you? Stay with me until the end, because what you will discover now may surprise you. This is the story of a dog who, with his unwavering loyalty and keen instinct, has become the unlikely hero of an American family. While everyone slept soundly, he was the only one to sense that something was wrong. The smell of smoke, the heat that was beginning to spread, the disturbing silence interrupted only by the crackle of burning wood. All this was enough for his protective instinct to awaken. Have you ever been through this? That moment when the heart races and the body reacts before the mind even understands what is happening? For it was exactly this impulse that made that dog not shut up. He started slowly, as if testing, a short bark, a subtle warning, almost as if to say, "Wake up, something is not right." But the family, exhausted from the day, remained in deep sleep. It was then that he made the most important decision of his life, not to give up. And this is where the strength of this story lies. Because when everything indicated that it would be too late, the dog moved on, raising his voice, barking without stopping, ignoring the approaching danger. There was no reward, no promise, only the urgency to save those he loved. The fire was already moving forward, gaining space by the minute, turning what was once a cozy home into a death trap. The heat increased, the smoke made the air unbreathable, but that dog stood his ground, insisting as if every bark was a desperate plea for his owners to open their eyes. Can you imagine the scene? The house engulfed in smoke, seconds running by, and a dog, alone, fighting time with the only resource it had, its voice. And it was that persistence that made the difference. What seemed like just noise in the end became the call that saved lives. Waking up amid the chaos of a fire is not something that anyone forgets. The despair, the rush, the confusion between dream and reality, all this mixes in a fraction of seconds. But there is something that is even more marked, the certainty that if it were not for that dog, perhaps nothing would have remained but ashes. This true story is not just about a fire or a miraculous rescue. She is about loyalty, instinct, and unconditional love. It's about how, at critical moments, a dog can become much more than a companion. It can be the difference between tragedy and hope. Stay with me, because in the next few moments you will understand how every detail of that night unfolded, and how this four-legged hero proved that courage can arise in the most unexpected moments. And perhaps, listening to this story, you will also remember something that you once lived, a moment when your dog or even another pet noticed something before everyone else, as if it had a sixth sense. If this subject makes sense to you, leave here in the comments what has touched you the most so far, because it is precisely the exchange of these experiences that creates this connection between us. Each comment is like a new layer in that conversation, and I love knowing how these stories resonate with those watching. And since we are living this emotion together, enjoy and leave your like, because it shows that this type of content has value for you. And more, when you subscribe to the channel, you are saying that you want to continue receiving stories like this, which inspire, excite, and make us reflect on how special these four-legged heroes are. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content, spreading more and more messages of courage and hope. Now, take a deep breath and get ready, because from here, we're going to dive even deeper into that night when the unexpected happened, and a simple bark turned into the voice that saved an entire family. The family in question lived in a typical American house, one of those that seem to carry with them not only bricks and wood, but also stories and memories built on a daily basis. The front garden was simple but lively, with a few flowers that Mother tended patiently, as if they were extensions of her own affection. On the balcony, a rocking chair creaked softly, a silent witness to late afternoon conversations and confidences exchanged between parents and children. The sunset always seemed more beautiful from there, perhaps not for the landscape itself, but for the feeling of belonging, of being at home, of being protected. The father was a man with a steady look and hands calloused by work. I didn't have a lot of free time, but I made sure to be present at the important moments. He was the kind of figure who didn't talk too much, but whose silence conveyed security. When he walked through the door at the end of the day, exhausted, he brought with him a mixture of tiredness and relief. The simple fact of being back in the warmth of his family renewed his strength. The mother, in turn, was the beating heart of the house. Always attentive to detail, she took care of everything with a silent, almost invisible, but essential dedication. He knew where each object was, remembered everyone's commitments, and somehow managed to balance the routine even on the most chaotic days. The children were pure energy. The boy, older, loved to invent stories, turn any object into a sword, ship, or rocket. The girl, younger, lived attached to him, wanting to take part in the adventures, even when she still did not understand the rules of the game. The corridors of the house echoed laughter, impromptu runs, and sometimes small childish arguments that quickly ended in hugs. And at the center of this dynamic, as a fundamental piece that linked everything, was the dog. A medium-sized dog, brown coat and deep look, able to convey more than words could. He had arrived as a puppy, gifted by a neighbor who could no longer take care of the litter. At first, the family thought twice. Caring for an animal required responsibility, time, and patience. But all it took was the first glance of the little dog, cowering in a corner with his ears drooping, for all doubts to disappear. That animal had something special. From day one, his presence was transformative. He explored every corner of the house as one who recognizes a sacred territory, but it did not take him long to understand where his place was. The living room became his resting territory, the backyard was his playground, and the children's room his silent waking space. In the first months, still clumsy, he knocked over vases, bit slippers, and aroused laughter when he ran after his own shadow. But at the same time, he already showed a protective instinct. He barked at any extraneous noise on the street, placed himself between children and unfamiliar visitors, as if he had already taken on the mission of guardian from an early age. Over the years, this connection has deepened. He wasn't just the family dog. It became an inseparable part of the identity of that home. Children grew up having in him a four-legged brother, an accomplice in secrets and adventures. How many times did they not share with him childish confidences, believing that he understood every word? And in a way, I really understood. His attentive eyes followed every movement, as if carrying the silent wisdom of those who observe without judging. In the morning, the ritual was almost always the same. The father was getting ready for work, and the dog followed him to the door. She would sit there, her body steady and her gaze fixed, until she saw him walk through the gate. Only then did he relax, as if he had done part of his duty. In the afternoon, when the children returned from school, the scenario was repeated with even greater intensity. He dashed to the gate, wagging his tail so hard that he seemed unbalanced. It jumped, spun, let out little barks of joy. For him, each reunion was a celebration, as if the few minutes of absence were eternities. At night, he would lie next to his mother while she organized the kitchen. At times it seemed to sleep, but any different noise made his ears immediately prick up. It was a dog of simple habits, but of redoubled attention. And in the midst of this routine, the family began to realize that he was not just company. He was a silent guardian, an attentive observer, always ready to act if something went awry. It is striking how in many cases we do not give due importance to these details. We believe that a dog barks only by instinct, that his loyalty is something automatic. But it is enough to live closely to realize that there is something deeper, something that touches our own mentality. A dog's loyalty is actually a form of pure love, free from any calculation. He does not think about advantages, does not expect anything in return other than coexistence. This is the invisible impact that shapes the home, a constant presence that teaches in silence about dedication and surrender. And that is where the hidden truth of this story lies, because deep down it wasn't just about an animal protecting its family. It was a bond built over the years, behind the scenes of everyday life. Every caress, every joke, every light scolding shaped this relationship, creating an indestructible connection. It reflected the joys, absorbed the sorrows, and became an essential part of one's journey. This link became so strong that when the unexpected happened, he was already prepared to respond. Not by training, not by chance, but because it was part of who he was. The dog was not only a home watchman, It was a living piece of the family's own history, a being that had become intertwined with the identity of each of them, making it impossible to imagine that house without his presence. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because talking about love, loyalty, and courage is not just about isolated behaviors. It is to immerse oneself in something that touches the essence of what it is to live in community, of what it is to build relationships capable of transforming destinies. This story reminds us that the most significant transformation does not arise from grandiose planned gestures, but from spontaneous attitudes born of love and daily coexistence. It is these little invisible choices that shape our lives and often decide the course of everything. And it is precisely because of this silent and powerful bond that night turned into an unforgettable landmark. Every detail of the coexistence of this family with the dog prepared the ground for the moment when courage would need to manifest itself in an extreme way. A night in which everyday life ceased to be just routine and became a battlefield. A night when a dog's voice, translated into insistent barking, rose against the fire that threatened to consume everything they had. But before we dive into this decisive moment, I want to invite you to record in the comments a word that summarizes what you have felt so far. It can be simple, but loaded with meaning. He says, "I'm on this journey too." The night was seemingly ordinary, one of those in which nothing seemed able to break the deep silence that enveloped the neighborhood. The wind blew lightly between the trees, causing the leaves to brush against each other in an almost hypnotic sound. The windows of the house were closed, protecting the residents from the early morning cold. In the parents' room, the father slept heavily, given over to the well-deserved rest after another long day of work, while the mother, even asleep, seemed to keep on her face a trace of silent concern, as if she was still mentally organizing the endless list of household chores. In the children's rooms, children's dreams came to life. The boy imagined himself the hero of his own adventures, exploring magical worlds that existed only in his imagination. And the girl, innocent, dreamed of dolls and colors, completely protected by the purity of childhood. Outside, the street remained deserted. Only now and then the distant noise of a car broke through the silence, reminding that the world continued to spin beyond those walls. Inside the house, however, time seemed suspended. Even the dog, who usually moved restlessly during the night, was lying in the corridor, half-closed eyes, breathing calmly, but with attentive ears. It was as if he was there to make sure nothing wrong approached, fulfilling his silent role as guardian. However, at an almost forgotten point in the house, the routine began to quietly fall apart. It could have been a short circuit in an old wire behind a piece of furniture, electric sparks that were born inconspicuous and almost invisible, or perhaps a burning candle that, consumed by time, reached a fabric and turned into a real threat. What really matters is not the technical detail but the effect. At that very moment, the invisible line between normality and tragedy began to be drawn. First came the smell. It was not strong, but enough to change the natural balance of the environment. Unobtrusive smoke began to rise, mixing with the cool evening air and slowly changing the atmosphere in the house. This is the kind of treacherous detail, so light that it does not awaken anyone but already fraught with the potential for devastation. Then came the heat, which at first spread in barely perceptible waves, warming the space little by little, like an invisible presence growing inside the walls. This moment reminds us of how real tragedies form. They don't always come from big explosions or obvious signs. They are often born in silence, hidden behind the scenes of routine, fed by small distractions that carry with them a hidden truth. The slightest carelessness can be the spark for an irreversible transformation. A poorly insulated wire, a forgotten candle, a household appliance turned on for hours beyond what is necessary. Small decisions, seemingly insignificant, but which can redefine entire destinies. Meanwhile, the house remained sunk in sleep. Father dreamed of responsibilities. Mother dreamed of relief. Children ran in universes invented in their minds. The furniture remained motionless. The pictures hanging on the walls showed no sign of change. Everything seemed static, as if the house, accomplice of silence, still wanted to hide the threat growing inside it. But there was someone awake, even if in partial wakefulness. The dog raised its head before any other signal was noticeable to humans. The sharp nose picked up the strange smell, and his body reacted immediately. He got up, walked down the hall, smelled the air, the walls, and stood in front of the stairs, attentive to every noise. There wasn't yet enough smoke to bother, but instincts screamed. The heart quickened, the paws firmed to the ground. It was as if something inside him said that night would not be like the others. As the animal grew restless, the fire gained strength. First, small pops, as if testing the limits, then larger flames which found wood and fabric as food. The curtain began to darken, forming black burn marks, and soon the flame turned into a frantic dance, illuminating the shadows of the room. The contrast was disturbing. Light and destruction mixed in a ballet of chaos that grew too fast. Fire is not just a physical phenomenon. He is transformation. He is movement. He is the constant reminder that life can change in a matter of seconds. Inside that house, in that silent dawn, the flames represented the concrete threat of erasing an entire history made of love, of bonds, of memories. And it all started with something so small that it could have been avoided. This is where the real impact lies. How often do we ignore minimal signals, believing that they are unimportant? A flickering light bulb, a strange smell of burning, a wire that heats up more than it should. Small revelations that warn us that something is not right, but that we often neglect because we are too busy or simply because we believe we are safe. The hidden truth is that absolute security does not exist. Danger can hide in the smallest loopholes, waiting only for the moment to reveal itself. As the fire raged downstairs, tension rose in silence. The walls began to heat up. Light smoke slowly rose through the gaps, carrying with it invisible but deadly particles. The dog, now on full alert, paced from side to side, ears raised, breathing quickened. He knew somehow that this smell did not belong to normality. His instincts, honed by generations, pushed him to act, even if their owners still remained trapped in deep sleep. The scene turned into a brutal contrast. On one side, relaxed bodies, quiet breaths, innocent dreams. On the other, the fire growing like a patient predator, which lurks before attacking. And in the midst of it all, just a dog, carrying alone the invisible responsibility of being the line between disaster and survival. Now, I want to go even deeper into this matter, because what was happening in that house is not only about fire and destruction, it's about choices, mindset, and perception. Often it is not the danger itself that determines the outcome, but our inability to see the signs it gives us. Fire is only the clearest metaphor for this. It starts small, shy, but when we finally realize it, it has already taken proportions capable of changing everything. This is the revelation that few face. Between ignoring a detail and paying attention to it can be the border between life and death, between continuing a journey or seeing it abruptly interrupted. At that moment, while the flames grew and the family remained oblivious, only the dog was awake to the gravity of the situation. And it would be from him the courage, insistence, and loyalty necessary to interrupt the peaceful sleep before everything was swallowed by the ashes. He says, "That makes sense to me." The dog was restless in a different way, as if every muscle in his body was vibrating at a frequency that only he could hear. The smell that invaded his nostrils was no longer a detail lost in the air. It was a definite trace, with texture and direction, a trail that cut the corridor like an invisible arrow. He lifted his head, took a deep breath, and that sour aroma, a mixture of heated wood, scorched fabric, and a faint metallic touch, like that of an overloaded electrical wire, confirmed what instinct had already whispered. Something was wrong. The house slept. The breathing of humans drew a soft, almost musical rhythm, but the music was off the beat, and he knew it. He got up, shook off his fur, set his paws on the floor, and advanced with restrained steps, as if walking through a sacred space that suddenly became fragile. The first bark came out short, compressed, like a warning that still respects the dawn. He didn't want to scare. He wanted to communicate. The tip of the muzzle described circles in the air, tracing the origin of that smell that seemed to be born from the floor below, near the room. The dog went to the door of his parents' room and leaned his chest against the wood, emitting a low moan, almost a wail. He scratched once, twice, 3 times, a cadence that on any other night would mean, "I want to come in. I missed you. Let me stay here." That night, though, it meant, "Wake up." On the other side, the father stirred lightly. The mother turned her face on the pillow, and the balance of sleep won for a few seconds a battle that danger was already trying to win on the lower deck. He took 2 steps back, looked up the stairs, turned his eyes to the crack where the light from the hallway drew a rectangle on the bedroom floor. Short, restrained, repeated barking. The whole body participated in the warning. The tail, which normally told stories of joy, now trembled in rapid jerks. The ears, perfect antennae, filtered out pops that came from below. Small tacks, pocks, the sound of wood yielding to heat. The dog went down 3 steps, stopped, sniffed again. The smoke was still shy, a translucent thread that rose as if it did not want to be seen. He understood that there was still time, but not much. He climbed back up, sped up, and headed toward the children's room. He pushed the door with his muzzle. The boy slept on his stomach, one arm drooping out of bed. The girl clutched the blanket, as if protecting a secret. The dog approached the boy, touched his hand with his paw. A sleepy murmur, a movement of the shoulder, nothing more. The dog issued a muffled ooh, a short call. Then he went to the girl's bed, put his muzzle to her face, sucked in the sweet smell of baby shampoo, and barked at a slightly higher frequency, punctuated by a moan that wasn't pain, it was urgency. Still, sleep won. It was as if the dawn had created a bubble around each dream, and breaking it would require more insistence. Down in the room, the story of the fire advanced through its own verbs. First the spark, then the heat, then the crackle, the flame, the darkened fabric, the curtain marking a wavy trail of coal. It seemed that the fire wrote a secret letter on the surfaces, black lines on the walls, a dancing glow on the table, a carpet edge curling from the heat. Fire is transformation, but before it takes everything, it insinuates itself. The hidden truth of tragedies is that they prefer to start behind the scenes, silent, disciplined, building step by step the explosion itself. And that rack was the exact size of an ordinary living room, with family pictures, a sofa, a curtain, and an antique piece of furniture with an overcharged socket. The dog sniffed again, and the information became clearer. Now there were particles irritating his throat, a dry scratch in the air channel that made him cough low. He returned to his parents' door, scratched harder, this time getting up almost to his feet, leaning against the wood. The impact of the body caused a hollow noise that went through the room. The mother opened her eyes for an instant, as one emerges from the surface of a lake, vacuumed vaguely, felt nothing she could name, and sank back into sleep. The dog barked. Not a joking bark, not a someone's coming bark. It was a different sound, tense, urgent, as if each note brought a piece of smoke inside it. He took 2 steps back, carried his body, slammed the door with his front paws, and barked again, now in sequence. It is on this border that instinct meets decision. To say that dogs don't decide is to ignore the complexity of what happens in borderline situations. There is a protective mentality that is not humane, but it is strategy. He tested one way, light alertness, ringing, short barking, and realized that it was not enough. He adjusted his behavior. It intensified. He moved back up the stairs, went down a little more. The heat was rising in waves. The railing was already warm. He leaned his muzzle against the edge of the step and moistened his tongue, as if the body needed to make a pact with itself. It will be now. He returned to the top, faced the door, calculated the position, and barked loudly, repeatedly, rhythmically, until the father at last awakened that much that separates the dream from the near agreement. The father opened his eyes, confused. The sound of barking fit into his ear like a nail that insists. "What is it?" he asked in the dark, without formulating to whom. Mom turned on her side, brought her hand to her chest, heard another bark. The dog, on the other side, recognized the small progress and pushed the door with his shoulder, insistent tapping on the wooden floor, tearing the silence with the tip of his nails. Dad sat on the bed, ran his hand over his face. The fire below crackled louder like pocket thunder. The smoke, thicker, began to rise through the cracks of the stairs, opening the first grey lines in the air of the house. The dog turned around and ran into the children's room. Now the urgency had another color. He touched the boy's hand again, lightly pulled the sheet with his teeth, a gesture that on other days meant, "Wake up, let's play." At that moment it meant, "Get up, we need to go." The boy opened one eye, not understanding, saw the dog restless, heard a distant snap, frowned. The dog barked again, short, and darted to the door, returning 2 seconds later as if to say, "Follow me." He repeated this twice, thrice, until the boy sat up, half dizzy with sleep, and called for his sister. The girl, lazy, made a protest sound, turned to the other side. The dog insisted, jumped on the carpet, lightly scratched the edge of her bed, barked louder. Meanwhile, the room looked like a bonfire contained in a house frame. The flame was already licking the edge of the sofa. Small dark flakes danced in the air, like snow inside out. The lampshade next to the bookcase began to melt at the base. The clock on the wall kept ticking the seconds in a cruel normality. If someone looked from the outside, they could tell it was just a sleeping house. Inside, time contracted. Every second had the weight of a decision. That's the invisible impact of small choices. A candle lit beyond repair, an overflowing outlet filter, a cord laid out anyway. There are revelations that only smoke delivers, but not everyone knows how to read. The father stumbled up, crossed the room and put his hand on the doorknob. It was still cold. Good sign. He opened the door and saw the dog staring at him. Big eyes, body leaning towards the stairs. Head pointed towards the children's corridor. He understood. It was not a whim. "What is it, boy?" he asked, almost in a plea. The dog barked into the children's corridor, ran and came back a living arrow. The father followed, calling his wife by name. She got up, put on her slippers, smelled a strange aroma. Now clear, a bitter note through the air in the hall. Her heart raced. The mother looked at the dog and silently translated what the eyes asked. "Hurry." The boy was already sitting on the edge of the bed. The girl waking up by force, rubbing her eyes. The dog went from one to the other, like a conductor pushing the music to climax. From downstairs came a more violent crack, a hollow sound like wood collapsing. The father ran up the stairs and saw the orange glow pulsing on the ground floor, an unnatural brightness that turned the room into an aquarium of fire. Her throat closed for a moment. She returned to the children's room, took her daughter in her arms, told her son to stay together, warns that they need to leave. The dog positioned itself on the side, attentive, looking back and forth, controlling the small convoy with the precision of one born to drive. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because these first signs of danger are a mirror of our own choices. The house is an organism, and we, without noticing it, determine its health in the details. The transformation that leads from normalcy to disaster is almost never abrupt. It sows itself into the fabric of everyday life. The mentality that ignores the strange smell, the hot plug, the flashing light bulb, is the same that postpones conversations, postpones decisions, pushes to tomorrow what, deep down already screams for today. There is a hidden truth behind the scenes. Every risk sends messages, and our whole lives get better when we learn to listen to them. The dog was the interpreter of this message. He did not debate pros and cons. He did not draw scenarios. He read the now with purity and acted. And that is why courage often appears in the body of those who do not even know the word courage, but understand their work in the world. Back in the hallway, smoke began to become visible in the evening light, grayish strands indenting the dark. The mother took a coat over the chair and wrapped her daughter. The father reached out to the boy. "Come down, breathe through your nose slowly," he said, bringing a firmness to his voice that he himself needed to hear. The dog tilted its ears back, checked the air, dug its nails into the floor, as if it could hold the floor with its paws. He went down 2 steps, looked up, barked short, went up 1 step, went down 3. The whole body said, "Come with me." On the ground floor, the fire had already jumped onto a cushion and gnawed the edge of the bookcase. The heat was rising like a tide. The smoke, thicker, leaned against the ceiling and poured a grey film over the edges of the stairs. The clock remained stubborn, ticking 1 minute at a time, but by then the minutes had multiplied in urgency. With his free hand, the father pulled the t-shirt to cover half of his son's face. The mother did the same with her daughter. The dog approached his mother, raised his muzzle as if checking if everyone was ready. So he went down first, attentive to the front and sides, avoiding the points where the heat seemed to radiate the strongest. At each step, a crack. The wood complained. The walls breathed warm. The dog barked twice, not out of fear, out of focus. He guided them to the bend of the stairs, paused to listen to the language of fire, a treacherous whistle coming from the direction of the curtain, a plock on the floor next to the sofa, the constant curr of fabric turning to charcoal. That was his map, a cartography of sounds and smells converted into quick decisions. The family followed him, and in that following there was more than going down a flight of stairs. There was the surrender of confidence to a guide who, outside of any rationality, understood what to do. At the bottom of the stairs the air was warmer, the skin felt. The dog bent to the left, avoiding the living room, and pointed with his whole body to the corridor leading to the kitchen and the back door. There, the air still seemed breathable. The father understood the route and nodded. The mother held her daughter as one who carries a world and called the boy close to her. The dog ran to the back door, jumped up twice, scratched the wood, barked short, came back and made the reverse path in 3 steps, leading them in a hurry, but also accurately. Life, at that moment, was a sequence of micro-decisions: turn where, lower when, step how, and every micro-decision had real impact. There are journeys that take place in kilometers, others in a few meters inside a house. This era of those that fit in meters and last forever in the memory. The dog stopped for a second to look back, made sure that no one stayed, no one stumbled, no one froze in fear, and again pushed the door with his shoulder. The latch resisted, as the latches resist at dawn. A small know that with insistence becomes yes. The father reached for the handle and spun. The metal was hot but bearable. The door opened a few inches, and the cold night air burst into the corridor like a blessing. The smoke swirled, looking for where to escape. Before they crossed, the dog ran to the edge of the room and barked at the flames, a kind of irrational challenge that nevertheless made sense. It was as if it said to the fire, "Not today." He returned immediately, passed under the father's arm, checked the girl on her mother's lap, touched the boy's leg with his muzzle, and planted himself on the threshold, sideways, opening the way like an emergency doorman who knows that, in that second, the body's function is to become an arrow and a shield. The father led the boy, the mother went out with the girl, and the dog finally retreated on his back, keeping his eyes inside until the last moment, as if refusing to leave the post ahead of time. Outside, the cold air bit into the lungs with relief. The sky, standing still, seemed designed to contrast with the chaos. The family breathed, the dog breathed together, and that collective breath had language. "We're alive, it's not over yet. We need to act." Mum trembled. Dad looked with his eyes for something that would do: a hose, a phone, a neighbor to shout at. The boy held his mother's coat. The girl cried softly, not quite understanding the size of what almost happened. The dog leaned on his father's knee, looked into the house, barked once without extra noise. There was alertness in the look, and there was, above all, a willingness to carry on. And here is the crux of these first signs. They are not the end. They are the bridge. They ask for an answer. They ask for presence. They ask for route adjustment. The dog translated this request, and the family, still awakening, began to translate it back the human way. Organize, decide, seek help, protect. There's no glamour in that moment. There's work. And the best part about courage is that it's also behind the scenes, and it builds brick by brick in the way we look at the details, in the way we teach ourselves to listen to what the world warns us when everything still seems normal. He said, "That makes sense to me." The dog had already done everything to break the sleep barrier, but instinct screamed that it needed to go further. The smell of smoke was now stronger. It filled the air with a suffocating density that slightly burned the nostrils. He could feel the heat spreading through the corridors and understood that the transformation of the environment was becoming irreversible. There was no more time for hesitation. If earlier the barking was short, almost shy, now it has turned into an insistent, powerful call, reverberating through the walls like an echo of despair. The silence of the dawn was definitively broken, and that canine voice, charged with urgency, became the only possible alarm. He went to his parents' door and began barking in sequence, audible blows that reverberated in the wood like desperate knocks of someone calling for help. It would jump against the door, scratch with its paws, spin in circles, and bark again without pause. It was as if each bark was a word, as if to say, "Wake up, time is running out." There was no room to give up. There was no tiredness. Instinct turned into an absolute mission, to save those he loved, no matter what the cost. The smoke, thicker, began to rise up the stairs, drawing dark threads in the air. With every second, the fire gained new strength, advancing with insatiable appetite on furniture, consuming fabrics, cracking wood with sounds reminiscent of small explosions. The heat began to transform the temperature of the corridor, and the dog felt on the pads of the paws the vibration of that mercilessly expanding enemy. But instead of retreating, it advanced even further. He would go back to the children, bark in their ears, poke with his snout, pull the sheet. When he realized there was no immediate response, He ran back to his parents' door, repeating the ritual of scratching, jumping, and barking. His persistence was almost superhuman, as if an invisible force guided his resistance. It is at this point that the emotion of the scene becomes more intense, because we're not just talking about an animal reacting to a stimulus. We are facing the revelation of a bond that surpasses any logic. The mentality of a dog is not built on complex speeches or reasoning, but on pure loyalty and instinctive decisions that carry love. He did not calculate risks, did not think about his own life. At stake was the survival of her family, and that was enough to keep her barking, even as the air grew heavy and her throat scratched with smoke. The parents now moved more restlessly, still not fully aware of what was happening. The insistent sound finally penetrated the subconscious, but the human body is slow to accept that it is in danger when it is in a state of rest. How often does this not happen in life? Small signals appear, alerts are given, but we insist on believing that it is only a passing nuisance. The hidden truth is that often it is not the lack of signs that threatens us, but our inability to recognize them. And in that room, this unconscious resistance to awakening almost cost dearly. The dog, without giving up, increased its intensity even more. The barking was no longer just loud, it was continuous, like a stream that gave no room for silence. He refused to allow the house to remain in the deceptive comfort of the night. Barking echoed down the hall, mingled with the crackling of the flames that grew below, creating a symphony of tension that filled every corner of the house. It was the struggle between two forces. On the one hand, the fire trying to extinguish everything. On the other, the dog trying to ignite the consciousness of the owners. It's important to realize that his persistence is a powerful metaphor for decisions and impact. How many times do we give up before the hour because we believe that no one listens to us? How many times have we underestimated the importance of insisting, of staying alert, of continuing even when it seems useless? The dog had no such doubt. He believed with every fiber of his body that his efforts would make a difference, and it was exactly this instinctive faith that changed the course of history. The air was beginning to weigh. The strong smell of smoke was already noticeable even to humans, albeit amid the torpor of sleep. Mom coughed once, turned over in bed. Dad put his hand to his nose, confused, but they had not yet fully awakened to the gravity of the situation. The dog then launched into its greatest show of courage. It not only barked but howled, a deep sound charged with despair and emotion. A call that crossed not only the house but the soul. It was impossible to ignore. This is the invisible impact that persistence generates. He did not accept the indifference of sleep, did not retreat before the smoke, was not intimidated by the rising heat. Each failed attempt turned into fuel for the next. It was a journey of insistence that could only have been born of unconditional love. And the great revelation that emerges from this scenario is simple. Persistence is the bridge between the impossible and the inevitable. The dog believed, and because he believed, he continued. Now, I want to go even deeper into this matter, because this persistence in the face of danger is not just an animal trait. It is a reflection of how true courage manifests itself behind the scenes in life. Persisting is not easy. It requires energy. It requires believing even when no one seems to listen. But it is this insistence that generates transformation, that breaks patterns, that saves stories. The dog teaches us that sometimes the greatest act of heroism is simply not giving up, even when the world seems asleep around us. He said, "That makes sense to me." The fire did not wait. Every second seemed to multiply his strength, as if he had a hunger of his own, an insatiable hunger that fed on wood, fabric, plastic, and even the silence that once reigned in the house. The room was no longer just a room. It had become the scene of an unequal war between flames and walls, between smoke and breathable air. The heat rose with intensity, pushing hot waves that spread through the corridors and began to climb the stairs. The smoke, once timid, now became thick, creating grayish drawings that snaked across the ceiling and advanced like invisible fingers towards the rooms. The dog felt every detail of this transformation. His paws already touched a floor that seemed warmer. His nostrils burned with the intense smell of smoke, and his ears caught louder and louder pops, as if the house itself screamed. But there was no room for giving up. The struggle against time had begun, and he knew in his way of understanding the world that every second could be the last. He barked even more insistently without breaks, as if trying to overcome the barrier of sleep by force. His voice echoed, tearing the dawn, mixed with the noise of the wood giving way. The family began to wake up little by little, but the human rhythm was too slow in the face of the rush of the fire. The father, still dazed, stood up without fully understanding. The mother coughed, bringing her hand to her face as she felt the smoke. The children, with half-closed eyes, were slow to react. It was as if everyone was trapped in a state of temporary denial, not understanding that the house was no longer a safe home, but a burning trap. And in this abyss between consciousness and reality, the dog became the vital link. He did not just bark. He ran from side to side, poked, pushed, pulled sheets, forced movement. His persistence was the physical translation of a hidden truth. Whoever hesitates at critical moments loses more than time, loses chances of survival. The heat now pressed on the upper floor like a suffocating presence. The smell of burning was no longer a detail, but a warning that tore the senses. The dog stood in the middle of the corridor, barking incessantly, then ran up the stairs, showing with his body the way out. He ran back to the room, climbed on the edge of the bed, pushed the little ones with his muzzle. I did not accept passivity. He had become the personification of urgency. It was as if to say, "We have no more time, we need to go now." The scene had an almost cinematic weight. On one side, the advancing fire, swallowing memories, furniture, family portraits on the walls. On the other, an animal that refused to give up, even with its throat already irritated by the smoke. It was an unequal battle, but it was also a powerful demonstration of love. The dog's persistence at that moment was not just survival instinct, it was decision, it was total surrender. He did not think about himself, did not seek refuge, did not try to escape. His focus was unique, waking up his family and leading them out. This struggle against time reveals a lot about life itself. How often are we put in situations where every second matters, where our choices need to be quick and firm, and yet how often do we not get stuck in hesitation, waiting for the danger to explain itself better, for the situation to become clearer? The dog's mindset shows us an important revelation. Acting in the face of risk, even without guarantees, is what makes the difference between losing and surviving. He didn't know exactly what would happen, but he knew he couldn't stop. The flames were now reflected on the walls of the upper floor, like living shadows that danced menacingly. The air became more and more unbreathable, and the noise of the fire was like an orchestra of chaos growing in intensity. The family finally began to react. The father called the children, the mother tried to organize the movements, but none of this would have been possible if that dog had not insisted to the limit, if he had not fought against time in the name of life. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the fight against time is not just a portrait of a burning house, it is a metaphor for our daily journey. Often we are surrounded by signs that we need to change something, habits, mentality, decisions that we push with our belly. The fire in these cases is symbolic. It can be a problem that grows in silence, a toxic relationship, a hidden truth that we avoid facing. And time, always relentless, does not stop for us to take courage. He moves forward, and the longer we delay, the more critical the situation becomes. The lesson hidden in this scene is clear. Persistence and immediate action can save not only lives but also destinies. He says, "I'm on this journey too." Finally awakened by the continuous sound and insistent knocking of the dog on the door, the father opened his eyes and realized that something was wrong. At first, his mind, still dulled by sleep, tried to look for simple, banal explanations, as it had so often done in other early mornings. Perhaps the dog had seen some figure passing along the street. Perhaps it had been disturbed by some noise from the wind hitting the tiles, or even was reacting to a restless dream, as often happens with dogs when they growl or move their paws in their sleep. But it was enough to take a deep breath, just once, for all these hypotheses to melt away like fog. The air no longer had the typical freshness of the early morning, nor the discreet smell of wood and fabrics in the house. What invaded his lungs now was something bitter, heavy, a pungent taste that scratched his throat and made his eyes water. A dry cough, involuntary, came immediately, denouncing that something serious was happening. In an awkward leap, he got out of bed, still dizzy from the inertia of sleep, but already seized by a sense of urgency that gave no room for doubt. The whole body was invaded by a rush of adrenaline. The heart raced, The mind searched for reasoning, but it was as if instinct screamed first. Even before consciousness asked questions, there was danger, and that danger was inside the house. The mother then awoke, startled both by the sudden movement of her husband and by the more aggressive sound of the dog. From the outside, the animal seemed maddened. It barked incessantly, scratched the wood with short nails, pushed the door with its body, as if it could knock it down by force of its own insistence. The sounds echoed in the room, now mixed with increasingly audible crackles coming from downstairs. She opened her eyes, still sleepy, but it didn't take her long to grasp the gravity. It was enough to raise your head and see the grey mist that was already invading the environment. Smoke seeped in through the cracks, smearing the contours of the furniture, creating a strange penumbra that blended into the natural darkness of the night. A chill ran down his spine. The heart raced in an irregular beat. Fear rose like an overwhelming wave. There was no time to wonder how it had begun, no room for complex reasoning. The house, until a few minutes before symbol of warmth and protection, had turned into a trap of flames and smoke. The walls that held memories, laughter, and everyday conversations now compressed the toxic air that threatened to swallow everyone. The father opened the door and was immediately greeted by the dog, which jumped towards him, barked in an almost desperate tone, and then shot down the corridor, indicating with its body which way to go. There was no doubt. The animal not only perceived the danger, but also showed a survival route. The corridor was already taken over by anomalous lighting, a mixture of dense shadows and orange reflections coming from the stairs. The dry crackling of the wood below left no room for illusions. The fire had spread, and every second of hesitation could cost dearly. The mother, suffocated by the smoke, covered her mouth and nose with the sleeve of her pajamas, instinctively trying to filter the air. But each breath became shorter, each sigh seemed insufficient. The eyes burned, tears flowed not only from fear, but from the direct effect of that toxic atmosphere. The urgency became overwhelming, as if invisible hands pressed against the chest, stealing air. The children woke up to the confusion. The boy, coughing, rubbed his eyes waterlogged by the tears of the smoke, unable to immediately understand what was happening. The girl, frightened, let out a high-pitched cry, a cry of despair mixed with the vulnerability of those who suddenly wake up in the midst of chaos. The dog rushed to them, barked closely, poked with its muzzle, brushed its body against the edge of the bed as if trying to forcibly lift them up. There was no way to ignore his message. They needed to get up immediately. The father, in an almost automatic movement, took his daughter in his arms. The small body of the child seemed to weigh tons, not for the physique but for the weight of the responsibility to keep it alive at any cost. The mother, firmly despite the panic, held the boy's hand and pulled him determinedly. Everyone set in motion. The corridor had become an invisible battlefield, the heat that rose through the walls, the dense air that suffocated, the fear that paralyzed. It was as if the house itself, now turned into a burning prison, was trying to prevent the escape. But there was no room to hesitate. The desperation was palpable. Each step was harder than the last, each breath a struggle against impending suffocation. The dog took on the role of a guide. It ran in front, then came back, circled between them, made sure that everyone was together. He did not accept to stand still, did not allow fear to stop them. He ran to the top of the stairs, looked back with bright eyes, came back quickly, poked them as if to say, "Come now." The intensity of his persistence was almost superhuman. The fire below already lit up the room as if hellish torches were burning everywhere. The orange reflection protruded from the walls, danced on the terrified faces, turned every detail into a cruel reminder of what was to come. The crackling of wood no longer came alone. It was accompanied by small collapses, pieces of ceiling sagging, fragments of furniture falling into flames, incandescent fabrics floating in the air before crumbling to ashes. In this scenario, the survival instinct was mixed with panic. The mother shouted the name of the children to make sure that they were close. The father tried to organize chaos in his own mind, but the feeling was that time ran through his fingers like sand. The fire did not wait. There was no pause, no truce. Action was needed. And paradoxically, it was the dog who dictated the pace, who did not let anyone surrender. Each bark was a reminder that life was still there, within reach of a quick decision, a firmer step. It is in this brutal contrast that the depth of the scene is revealed. On the one hand, the imminent destruction, the collapse of the security they knew. On the other, the tireless persistence of an animal that refused to give up. Between these two extremes, the family, torn between paralyzing fear and the need to react, tried to find strength amid the smoke that spread and made every second more critical. This is the hidden truth that we so often forget. In extreme situations, it is not comfort. It is not patient waiting or lengthy reasoning that saves us. It is the immediate action, the courage to move forward even when everything inside us asks to retreat. Children cried, coughed, clung to their parents with all their might. The boy, although larger, let himself be guided by the firmness of his mother, while the girl shrank in the arms of her father. The weight seemed to double, not because of the small body, but because of the overwhelming responsibility. Every step taken by that father was a vow of resistance. Every grip of the mother on the boy's hand was a silent pact of protection. The dog, like an arrow, cut through the corridor, went back and forth, never allowing slowness to set in. Every second it seemed that the flames were about to reach them, but his energy worked like an invisible engine, pushing them forward. The persistence of the animal was a living metaphor for the transformation that takes place in moments of crisis. When all seems lost, there is always an internal or external force that reminds us that giving up is not an option. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what we see here is not just a family fleeing a fire. It's a clear representation of what runs through all our journeys, the impact of urgent decisions. At critical moments, there is no time to analyze every detail. There is no room to hope for perfection. There is only the need to act, to trust instincts, to respond to the immediate call of reality. It is persistence, courage, and above all, trust in those who are next to us that determine the outcome. He said, "That makes sense to me." The corridor seemed endless, but the family finally managed to reach an area where the air, though still laden with smoke, seemed less suffocating. Despair gave way to a kind of silent shock. The eyes waterlogged, the lungs burning, the bodies trembling with adrenaline. It was at that moment that they realized, between the rush and the rush, that not everyone had come out unscathed. The mother, shaking her son's hand, noticed a deep scratch on the boy's arm, provoked by a burning fragment of wood that had detached from the ceiling and fallen near he. The corridor seemed endless, but the family finally managed to reach an area where the air, though still laden with smoke, seemed less suffocating. Despair gave way to a kind of silent shock. The eyes waterlogged, the lungs burning, the bodies trembling with adrenaline. It was at that moment that they realized, between the rush and the rush, that not everyone had come out unscathed. The mother, shaking her son's hand, noticed a deep scratch on the boy's arm, provoked by a burning fragment of wood that had detached from the ceiling and fallen near him. The red and scorched skin denounced not only the proximity to the fire, but also the risk they had taken when crossing that corridor taken by the flames. The father, still with his daughter in his lap, noticed his own marked body. The sleeves of his pajamas were singed, and his exposed arm revealed superficial burns, small but painful, like reminders that luck and haste had made a difference. Every movement hurt, but there was no time to complain. The father, still with his daughter in his lap, noticed his own marked body. The sleeves of his pajamas were singed, and his exposed arm revealed superficial burns, small but painful, like reminders that luck and haste had made a difference. Every movement hurt, but there was no time to complain. The protective instinct spoke louder, and any injury seemed irrelevant in the face of the certainty that they could have lost everything in a matter of minutes. And there was the dog. There was the dog. When they finally reached a point of respite, the eyes turned to him. The animal gasped intensely, its tongue sticking out, its chest rising and falling at a rapid pace. Its fur was blackened in some parts, especially on the paws and back, where the proximity to the fire had left marks. These were not just superficial stains. Small cuts, probably caused by shrapnel from glass or wood, bled slightly. The scene was heartbreaking, but at the same time revealing. The dog had not measured efforts, had not hesitated to put himself between the family and danger. He walked through the smoke, threw himself against doors, ran over glowing embers, and came back again and again to make sure everyone was together. He risked his life without asking for anything in return, and it is at this point that the reflection deepens, because we are not just talking about physical injuries or passing scratches. What lay before that family was living proof of the eye, and it is at this point that the reflection deepens, because we are not just talking about physical injuries or passing scratches. What lay before that family was living proof of the impact of instinctive decisions, of the courage to act even when all seems lost. The dog, in its purity of intent, showed what many human beings forget, that true strength lies in putting yourself at risk for those you love. He didn't calculate probabilities, didn't do rational analysis, didn't weigh risks. It just followed an impulse of loyalty and protection that at that moment was worth more than any elaborate strategy. The father, looking at the exhausted animal, felt a different heaviness in his chest. It wasn't just the relief of having the family safe, but the awareness that they might never be able to fairly repay what the dog had done for them. The mother, wiping her eyes waterlogged by smoke and tears, realized that it was not just about escaping from a fire. It was an unseen lesson, a profound revelation about what commitment and total surrender mean. The father, looking at the exhausted animal, felt a different heaviness in his chest. It wasn't just the relief of having the family safe, but the awareness that they might never be able to fairly repay what the dog had done for them. The mother, wiping her eyes waterlogged by smoke and tears, realized that it was not just about escaping from a fire. It was an unseen lesson, a profound revelation about what commitment and total surrender means. And the children, still trembling, hugged the dog as if looking for a safe haven, even seeing its injured paws up close. This seemingly simple scene carries a hidden truth. We often underestimate the strength of what is next to us. We live believing that protection will always come from big plans, from unshakable certainties, from authority figures. But in practice, it is the gestures of loyalty and courage, often silent, often unexpected, that save us behind the scenes of life. The dog not only guided that family, he was the living representation of the transformation that occurs when someone decides to put themselves between danger and those they love. And here comes a crucial point: injuries, however painful. It's funny how extreme moments reveal our essence. In everyday life, we talk about values, about strength, about family, but rarely are we so brutally tested. When this happens, we discover who we really are and how much we are willing to give. For that dog, the decision was made from the start. He didn't need instructions. He didn't need promises. She just knew that her journey was intertwined with that of that family, and that her role was to fight to the last breath to keep them alive. And how many times in life do we fail to recognize the signs of this same courage around us? How often do we ignore the silent dedication of those who are always present, even in the moments when we do not notice? Transformation happens not only in the literal flames of a fire, but also in the small daily fires, in the unexpected difficulties, in the choices that require sacrifice, in the hidden truths that are revealed when one puts the other first. While the family watched the dog, something changed inside them. It wasn't just gratitude, it was an internal reconfiguration, a change of mindset. Priorities seemed to align differently, as if the experience had laid bare what really mattered. Life could be rebuilt, walls could be erected again, furniture could be replaced. But the lesson of the impact of that moment would never be erased. The certainty that true courage is manifested in the act of taking risks, even if it leaves marks. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because the injuries, although painful, were not the end of the story. They became marks of a journey, symbols of a choice that changed everything. And that is the essence of life. To understand that each scar is also a revelation about who we are and how far we are willing to go. He says, "I'm on this journey too." When the flames were finally contained, and silence began to occupy the space where before the fire roared like an insatiable beast, the family realized that they were not alone. Outside, there was already a group of neighbors gathered, some in shock, others with buckets in their hands as if they were still trying to find some way to act against the intensity of that fire that had taken devastating proportions. The scene was illuminated by the red and blue lights of the fire trucks, which arrived with the speed that the urgency demanded, cutting the dawn with shrill sirens that echoed through the entire street as a call to the reality of the tragedy. Firefighters descended from the vehicles in synchronized motion, each knowing exactly what to do, extending hoses, giving firm orders, positioning equipment. The fight against the fire was quick but intense, and in a matter of minutes, what seemed indomitable began to lose strength. Still, for all who watched, the real spectacle wasn't just the fighting of the flames. It was the sight of that family gathered outside, hugging, trembling, water-eyed, but alive. In the center of this picture, panting with exhaustion, his hair singed, his paws scratched, and his watchful gaze was the dog. It was impossible not to notice. As firefighters worked, neighbors pointed and murmured, almost incredulous. "He's the one who woke up the family," said one lady in a choked voice, tears streaming down her face without her noticing. Another added, almost in a whisper, "If it wasn't for this dog, they'd all be dead inside." That spontaneous recognition began timidly, but soon spread like an invisible current, turning the dog into a symbol of something greater than anyone there could immediately explain. One of the firefighters, as he approached to check on the family's condition, heard the report overwhelmed by crying and coughing. He knelt before the animal, passed his hand over his still warm head, and in a firm, solemn tone said aloud for all to hear, "This here is the real hero of the night." It wasn't just a comment, it was a public validation, loaded with weight and authority. Coming from someone accustomed to saving lives amid chaos, the statement had even more impact. The phrase echoed at dawn like an indisputable stamp. The dog had saved that family. The news spread in a matter of hours. Local newspapers and television stations were not long in coming, attracted by the irresistible force of the narrative. Reporters with microphones, cameras on, flashes that cut through the darkness. It all turned to that family and the dog that had somehow defied the odds. The scene was almost cinematic. A house still smoking, a surviving family, and next to it, an exhausted animal that did not seek applause, but that had become the protagonist of a story impossible to ignore. The first headlines were already in the air, even before the sun came up. Hero dog saves family from fire. The bark that was worth 4 lives. When instinct overcomes the impossible. The narrative ran faster than the flames of the night before, and as the story gained traction, experts began to be called in to explain what had happened. Veterinarians, handlers, animal psychologists. Everyone agreed on one point. Although dogs are protective by nature, that episode went further. It wasn't just survival instinct, said a renowned expert on canine behavior. It was a conscious decision to put the well-being of the family above one's own. This type of attitude reveals a level of bond and loyalty that goes beyond common explanations. Another expert added something even deeper. At that moment, the dog took the leading role. He not only reacted to danger, he guided the family, coordinated their escape, maintained the unity of the group. He was, in essence, the commander in the midst of chaos. These words not only enhanced the figure of the animal, but also offered the audience a fresh perspective on what loyalty really means. It wasn't just a curious case of animal bravery. It was a revelation of how love and unconditional surrender can literally change destinies. The family, still in shock, watched all this with tears in their eyes. The father, in a choked voice, repeated that he would never be able to pay what he owed the dog. The mother, hugging the children, said that although they had lost part of their home and their possessions, they had gained something even greater, living proof that love knows no barriers of species, language, or instinct. "He's part of the family, always has been," she said between sobs, "but now he's our guardian." And while all this was going on, the dog did not seem to mind cameras, applause, or statements. Still attentive, he watched the family as if his mission was not over. Even wounded, even tired, he remained on his feet, vigilant. That contrast is what made the scene all the more striking. The world extolled his courage, but he remained simply who he was: loyal, protective, silent guardian. Perhaps therein lies the most powerful revelation in this story. We live in a society that celebrates grandiose headlines, that pursues spectacular feats, but that often forgets the value of silent gestures. True transformation is not born only from public recognition, but from the intimate, invisible impact that changes the mentality of those who witness or listen to a story like this. Because deep down, this is not just the story of a dog that saved a family. It is a reminder that courage, loyalty, and unconditional love are forces that can transform the course of any journey. And if we look closely, we will see that this transformation does not happen only in the family that survived the fire. It spreads. Touch the neighbors who witnessed the scene. It touches the firefighters who, even accustomed to tragedies, stopped to recognize the greatness of an animal gesture. It touches the journalists who, for a moment, put aside the coldness of the profession to be moved by the story. It touches even those who read or watch this narrative now, because deep down, we are all affected by examples that reveal the hidden truth. Life can change completely when someone decides to act out of love. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter. Because behind all this external recognition, there is a silent transformation within one's own family and within each one who has been impacted by this story. And it is in this space, where the public meets the intimate, that the true revelation happens. He says, "That makes sense to me." What remained of that dawn was not just the memory of a devastating fire, or the mark of fear that everyone felt. What really stuck in the memory of the family, the neighbors, and even the professionals who witnessed the scene was the indisputable proof that courage, loyalty, and love can be born where we least expect it, and that often the greatest heroes do not wear uniforms, receive military training, or carry prestigious titles. Some have only 4 paws, attentive eyes, and a heart willing to give itself without measuring consequences. And there is something profoundly transformative when that truth leaps from the world of possibility to the shock of real experience. Suddenly, the abstract becomes flesh. The improbable gains a name, and hope ceases to be a loose word to become a gesture that changes destinies. In that instant, the narrative was no longer just about a dog that saved his family. It was about something that transcends species, instincts, and borders. The courage of the animal could not be explained only as an automatic reflex of survival. There was, in every bark, in every turn to check if everyone was together, a trace of conscience, almost a decision. He didn't just react, he led. Not only protected, he put himself at risk. And he didn't just survive, he turned the tide of a story that seemed doomed to the worst of endings. Between the orange shadows of dawn and the sour smell of smoke, an entire mindset reconfigured itself. Instead of panic, the insistence; instead of paralysis, the decision; instead of loss, the shared journey of getting out alive. And it is precisely at this point that the most powerful reflection lives. Because if we stop to think, how often do we underestimate the strength of loyalty? How often do we believe that courage needs to be grandiose, recorded in headlines, or marked by feats that impress crowds? The hidden truth, revealed through the smoke of that night, is that the greatest acts of bravery often happen in silence. These are quick, almost invisible decisions that change destinies without asking for anything in return. The yes that someone says to protect, the step taken when fear ordered to retreat, the look that chooses to stay when the easiest thing would be to flee. In these scenes of everyday life, where history usually passes without an audience, it is gestures like this that write what later we will call a miracle. The family survived, but did not come out unscathed. Marks remained, not only on the skin with scratches and light burns, but also in memory. The trauma of the fire, the sound of the crackling of wood, the smell of smoke impregnated in the senses, all this mixes and reappears in dreams, in the restlessness before sleep, in the little scares of everyday life. However, along with this, a new mentality was born, a new way of seeing life. The fire stole part of the house, but it gave back something much more valuable: clarity about what really matters. Because when all seemed lost, what prevailed were not objects, walls, or material memories. It was the living courage of a dog that did not accept defeat. It was the non-negotiable love that swept through the night, pulled the family out of their torpor, and rewrote in minutes what could have been a final tragedy. And if we look closely, we will see that this episode is more than an isolated story. It is a mirror for all of us. It shows that the transformation we seek so often outside in achievement, possession, or recognition may actually lie in the simple act of surrendering for something greater than ourselves. Dog loyalty did not bother to calculate risks or benefits. He didn't hesitate, it just was. And that willingness, that genuine surrender, is exactly what we lack at so many turning points in our journey. Instead of waiting for the ideal scenario, the perfect solution, the safe plan, there are moments when what saves us is to choose, now, what the heart knows and the body accompanies. Think about the choices that shape life. It is not always the big decisions planned calmly and logically. Often these are the moments when we are forced to act, when time does not allow long reflections. It is in these seconds that our true essence appears. The dog showed this clearly. There was no room to think about whether he would return alive. There was no way to regret consequences. There was only the urgency to protect the one he loved. Isn't that what defines true heroes? Heroes are not the ones who never feel fear. They are the ones who, fully feeling it, still cross the bridge between danger and protection. They are the ones who, at the limit of pain, do not negotiate love. Heroes are not just those who appear on movie screens, dressed in shiny armor or carrying superpowers. Heroes can have a burnt muzzle, bruised paws, and eyes full of determination. Heroes can be born from what society often calls just an animal. But anyone who was on that street, who heard the barking, who saw the family come out alive, knows that there was nothing just in that attitude. There was greatness. There was such a profound impact that it will hardly be forgotten. And it is in this impact that life reorganizes itself. Priorities are rearranged, intimate promises are made. The house, when it is rebuilt, will carry, among its bricks, a silent pact of gratitude. That's the connection we need to make with our own history. If a dog, guided by love and loyalty, was able to overcome fear and face the flames, what prevents us from acting with the same courage in the face of our internal fires? How many times have we retreated, paralyzed, or given up in the face of challenges that, deep down, only asked for a step of faith, a firm decision, a genuine surrender? That dog's journey is a living reminder that the impossible can be overcome when we choose to act, even with everything against us. It is also an invitation to humility, to recognize that the strength we lack is sometimes right there, looking into our eyes, wagging our tail, waiting for us to remember what is essential. Behind the scenes of this story, there is something even more revealing. The silent transformation that happens not only in the family that has been saved, but in everyone who comes into contact with this account. Because it is not just about the fire that was put out that dawn, but about the invisible fires that burn within each of us. Insecurities, fears, doubts, obstacles. The dog shows us, without speeches, without words, that it is possible to cross the flames when there is a greater reason supporting the walk. And when that motive is love, decisions cease to be calculations and become compromises. Compromises with life, with truth, with the protection of what should never be lost. The impact spreads like waves. Neighbors who once saw that animal only as the dog next door now look at it with admiration. Children who grew up believing that heroes are distant figures realize that sometimes they live on the same street, sleep at the foot of the bed, accompany the way to the door. Firefighters accustomed to daily despair stop for a second to recognize the greatness of an instinctive gesture that, in this case, seemed more lucid than many human reasoning. The media registers, experts explain, but it is in the silence after the news that the revelation does its job. Everyone who listens to this story turns to himself with a question in his pocket: what would I protect at any cost? And there is another, even deeper layer to this reflection. The courage of that dog did not exist in isolation in time. It was trained by the small rituals of everyday life. The look that checks if everyone has arrived, the ear that recognizes footsteps, the body that stands in the way of the stranger, the bark that filters the noise of the world. The great action is born of many micro-actions, almost imperceptible. It is in the details that the mentality is formed, in the returned affection, in the built trust, in the constant presence. The hero of that dawn began to be born long before the fire. He was born in the routine, behind the scenes, in the seemingly equal days. This is also the case with us. We will not be giants in the moment of crisis if we are not faithful in the daily millimeter of choices. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because behind the brilliance of a story with a happy ending, there is an invitation to responsibility. It is not enough to admire. We must learn. What did that family change afterwards? What did each neighbor decide to do from there? What can we, by listening to this account, adjust in our own journey? Maybe it's installing a smoke detector, overhauling the wiring. Yes, practical decisions are urgent. But perhaps it is something less visible and even more decisive, cultivating bonds that save us when the ground shakes, training our gaze to the signs, re-educate haste so that it does not trample over the essentials. And above all, remember that love is the only strategy that does not fail when everything else seems to fail. Because loyalty is a school. It teaches discipline without words, courage without speeches, and presence without fanfare. The dog that woke the family up that morning didn't invent courage on the spot. He just let the courage that already existed in him do what he needed to do. It is a mirror so honest that it hurts. How often do we have courage inside and lock it with a padlock of shame, calculation, doubt? How many times do we ask for a guarantee of the result before taking the first step? Real heroes surrender to the duty of the moment, not the comfort of future applause. And that's why his story resonates so strongly, because it brings us back to the simplicity of what is right. Perhaps that is why this narrative excites children and adults with the same intensity. Children, because they understand the language of instinct and recognize in the dog a friend who does not flinch. Adults, because they realize, sometimes with guilt, sometimes with relief, that it is possible to start over, to recalibrate the compass, to dust off the virtues that the rush has forgotten. The transformation proposed here is not just about preventing tragedies. It is about restoring priorities. It's about deciding that life is worth more than haste, that people are worth more than things, that love is worth more than any impeccable plan drawn on paper. And when the day dawns after a night like that, something changes in the way the light comes in through the window. Even if the walls are black with smoke, even if the smell is still pervading, there is a new clarity stretching across the floor. It's not just the sun, it's understanding. The family looks different. The neighbor smiles in a way that makes promises. The children hug for no apparent reason. The dog falls asleep with the tranquility of one who has fulfilled the role that existence itself has entrusted to him. The house will still need repair. The routine will still stumble. The fears will still try to return. But the mentality has been baptized again, and this no one takes. Ultimately, this story is a reminder that a dog's courage, loyalty, and love can overcome any obstacle and even save human lives. And more than that, it is a call for us to recognize the heroes who live around us, those who watch unnoticed, who protect without announcement, who decide for the good when no one is watching. Heroes can have 4 paws and an incredible instinct. They can live in your house, walk across the room every night, lie near the door like a silent guardian. And when the time comes, they will do whatever it takes, not to be remembered, but to keep you alive. He says, I'm on this journey too. What this story leaves in each of us is not only the memory of a dog that saved his family, but the revelation of a hidden truth that crosses generations. Persistence and loyalty can, yes, be the difference between life and death. When we look at that instant when everything seemed to fall apart, what sustained hope was not a technological resource. It was not the physical strength of the residents, and not even the speed with which the firefighters arrived on the scene. What sustained it was the invisible bond between an animal and its family, a silent connection built on a day-to-day basis, behind the scenes of a simple routine but full of meanings. And it is this connection that turned into the spark that kept the flame of survival burning, even when the fire devoured everything around. It's curious to think that a bond that seemed so commonplace, the backyard banter, the late afternoon strolls, the simple act of being around, would prove that night to be the most powerful force against despair. And perhaps that's the great teaching. Never underestimate the power of the bonds you build behind the scenes in life, because it is they who, in extreme moments, become invisible walls capable of supporting hope. As we reflect on this, we realize that life is constantly testing us, putting before us situations that require much more than technical skill or brute force. It asks for delivery, it asks for a firm mentality, it asks for decisions that often cannot be postponed. And it is precisely in these moments, where there is no room for calculations or guarantees, that the essence of what we are reveals itself. The dog of that dawn did not expect applause, did not seek recognition. He only responded to an internal call that transcended any logic, and this response provokes us to look at our own choices with more courage and less hesitation. The transformation that comes from this experience goes far beyond the family that survived. She touches the neighbors who witnessed the scene, inspires the firefighters who witnessed the rescue, thrills the children who have come to believe that heroes can also have 4 legs. But most of all, it invites us to question how we have faced our own fires, those that do not burn wood or furniture, but consume our peace, our faith, and our ability to move forward. How many times do we stop fighting for something essential because we find it too difficult? How many times have we surrendered before the hour because we believe that alone we would not have the strength? The courage of this dog shows us that when the reason is true, the impossible ceases to be a limit and becomes just a challenge. And perhaps this is what excites us most, the fact that there was no calculation in that dog's gesture. There was no strategy, there was no rehearsal. It was a raw, pure decision born of absolute surrender. And that's why it impacts us so much, because he did what many of us in situations of fear might not have done. He chose to face the fire instead of running from it. He chose to protect rather than hide, and in doing so, he left a mark that goes beyond life itself. That is the beauty of stories that transform. They do not get stuck in the past, but spread cross borders and become seeds of change. Who heard or saw this narrative did not remain the same. There was a silent shift in mindset, a profound impact that rearranged values, sparked decisions, and rekindled hopes. Because deep down, we all seek a reminder that loyalty is still worth it, that persistence can reverse scenarios of defeat, that love is stronger than any fear. And this story offers us just that, an invitation to believe again. The most striking thing is that this kind of act forces us to review what we call heroism. It is not only the extraordinary that deserves to be remembered, but also that which is born of simplicity. How many invisible heroes pass through our lives without us noticing? How many times has someone made a silent, no-fuss decision that saved us from something worse? The dog just made it indisputably clear that heroism is not about greatness, but about surrender. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because if courage and loyalty can save lives in a real fire, imagine what they can do in the invisible fires that each of us faces. Relationships in crisis, projects about to collapse, dreams suffocated by disbelief, internal battles that seem insoluble. What would happen if, instead of backing down, we decided to persist with the same intensity as that dog? What if our mindset was trained to resist, even when all seems lost? Perhaps the revelation is that we are often one single act of courage away from completely transforming our journey. How many internal fires have we allowed to consume what we had most precious, simply because we did not believe that there was a way out? How many dreams were abandoned because it seemed too risky to continue? The dog teaches us with his gesture that persistence can cross the thickest smoke, that loyalty can defy the most intense fire, and that love is capable of making a being put his life at risk without thinking twice. This is the kind of revelation we cannot ignore, and that is precisely why stories like this cannot be ignored. They act as mirrors, showing that the impact of an attitude can go far beyond the moment it happens. That dog not only saved a family, he awakened in thousands of people the awareness that life is worth living with dedication, that every decision has weight, and that persistence, even when invisible, is capable of redesigning destinies. That's the message that needs to echo in every heart that comes this far. And when we think about impact, we understand that it doesn't just happen on the surface. It generates waves, reverberates, crosses barriers that we do not see. The dog's gesture became headlines, but it also became reflection in distant homes, in hearts that may have been about to give up. He not only saved a family, he saved hopes, saved faith, saved the sense that it is still possible to rely on the invisible force that unites such different beings. This is the hidden truth that we need to carry with us. Life will always offer us fires to put out, crises to face, pains to endure, but it will also give us opportunities to show who we really are in the face of chaos. And if a dog was able to walk through fire, maybe we will also be able to walk through our own inner labyrinths, as long as we are willing not to give up. He said, "That makes sense to me." After all this, it is impossible not to feel that this story has left a mark on us. If you've made it this far, it's because this content made sense to you in some way, and that's exactly why I want to invite you to continue with me on this journey. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the next videos, because the idea is always to bring reflections and stories that really move with us. And since you stayed until the end, leave there in the comments the phrase "I'm with you until the end," just so I know that we walk together in this. Oh, and if this video touched you, also leave your like. It's a simple but powerful way to show that this connection was worth it. Now it doesn't stop here. There is a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there, because our conversation is still just beginning.